welcome to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you with us for another show. Of course, that's assuming you've been with us before. In case you haven't, let's introduce ourselves. I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor and an author, and I serve a church in the Pacific Northwest, just right outside of Portland. The church is located in Vancouver, Washington. And I've been a real estate investor and a home improvement contractor, and I've even been a professor of philosophy and taught philosophy to undergraduates for about a decade. Anyway, that's enough about me. How about going to you, Tom, and then on to Glenn?
I'm Tom Price. I'm a teacher currently. I teach at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and other places, teach theology, ethics, philosophy, and a few other things.
And I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a retired professor of early modern European history, specializing in the Reformation. I'm also a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, and my main gig is as a ministry associate for Reflections Ministries.
Okay, well, today is my day, and what we're going to talk about is justice and reality. Justice and reality. And before I kick things off, I just want to say one last thing about our new Patreon account. So you can follow the Theology Pugcast on Patreon. You can even become a monthly supporter of the podcast, but that's not really what I'm interested in highlighting at the moment. What's really cool about this new Patreon account is if you're interested in listening in to a show being recorded, you can do that through Patreon. So if you go to Patreon, I believe that there will be a way for you to access the show when it's being recorded, and you can even ask questions in the chat box and stuff like that. And we'll be able to see those questions and perhaps even, if we haven't gotten so wrapped up in our conversation, actually read them and respond to them on the fly. Anyway, that's the idea. So please check out our new Patreon page, and at that location, we'll let folks know when we're going to be recording, and if it's convenient for you to be part of our recording sessions in that manner, we'd love for you to join us. Anyway, there is a link in the show notes to the Patreon page. Anyway, let's jump into the subject. So, one of the things, of course, when it comes to the subject of justice, is there is a implicit and oftentimes explicit goal of treating everyone the same. In other words, people should have the laws applied uniformly and equally to everybody, regardless of their, say, social background, level of education, etc. But there is a sort of a speed bump to this ideal in our quest to get to that goal, and that speed bump is reality. There are different ways that reality sort of troubles this ideal or gets in the way of its pursuit. One of the things that reality presents us with is that we're physically not all created equal. Some of us are taller than others. Some people are better looking than others. Some people are more gifted in certain ways than other people. And that's just a start. At an even more fundamental level, the human race is dimorphic. It comes in two types, male and female. And there are things physically that men do that women don't do, and there are things that physically women can do that men can't do. I know this is all very radical and very, I think, unnerving to some people, but it's simply the case that women have babies and men don't. I know that that's news to some folks and triggers people, but the reason why it triggers people is the very point of this episode. It's because folks have an ideal when it comes to their understanding of justice that's out of touch with certain physical realities. And those physical realities just simply have to be either ignored or in some sense altered in order to accord with these or this notion of justice that I just described. Anyway, I want to get into that a little bit today, particularly in light of the recent Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe. there are a lot of people who are unhappy because they believe that their rights have been taken away, and that, of course, implies what I'm getting at, that justice doesn't have to take into account sort of intractable physical realities, things that distinguish people and make them different and necessarily require people being treated differently. But anyway, any thoughts that you guys have in response to the sort of the setup that I've just laid out?
I mean, just on the just kind of running with some of the things you've said, I often see a kind of strong inconsistency that develops with people, that on the one hand, they embrace the kind of idea of the human being as having choice and their decision, all of the Enlightenment kind of autonomy, as something that is being threatened and should be celebrated and therefore equally applied. But some of the same people have adopted also, for example, a radical kind of anti-science approach to things, which was the main vehicle through which autonomy was actually expressed, whether it's in the, we're seeing now the altercation of the body and things like that. But also you have this strange connection to the green movement, which is all about getting technology and human autonomy out of the way, and restoring things back to reality and the natural, all the while on the flip side, embracing this kind of notion that we are hindering people's rights if they apply it, if something puts a limit on them, their natural reality in terms of law and things like that. Anyway, I don't know if that made a lot of sense, but that was one of the things that came up.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I've noticed a remarkable inconsistency as well, and almost a kind of inversion. So oftentimes with, progressives, I'll use sort of the left-right language, progressive, conservative language that we're all sort of accustomed to. With progressives, there's a sense in which nature is to be honored and protected in terms of its sort of unconscious and sort of unaltered states. But when it comes to the human body, that no longer applies. And then you can get the reverse with some conservatives. Some conservatives have no problem with regard to intervening in the natural order of things outside of the human sphere. But when it comes to our bodies, then they're the champions of conservation and natural processes. And so I guess my thought is that there's probably room in both directions for some work here as we think about this stuff. But I was thinking primarily, for the sake of our show, in the direction of the human body and some of the realities that we just can't change, that are givens that we need to work with, and I'll give away my agenda. I think that our understanding of justice needs to accord with physical reality. It doesn't work the other way.
Yeah, and another thing that we should probably define terms a little bit more precisely. I worked for a while with Chuck Colson with Prison Fellowship and doing worldview stuff with him, and as a result, I've ended up working with this idea of justice and from a worldview perspective. And what we have to do first is distinguish two kinds of justice. There's retributive justice, which means if you do something wrong, how do you balance the scales? That's associated with criminal justice, things like that. But it's broader than that. The other is distributive justice. And what we're dealing with here really falls in that category. Distributive justice has to do with how you allocate the goods of society in some sort of sense of a fair way. And there are a lot of different theories about what this looks like. What we're hearing now, sort of across the board, even before you get into the Dobbs decision, is the idea of equity. The problem is the current definition of equity as it is being used is not the one that has historically been used with the issue of distributive justice. Equity today means everybody gets equal outcomes. Equity historically meant that you get the goods of society in proportion to your contribution. The more you contribute, the more you get back.
Yeah, the weird thing about it is those of us who understand equity in the latter sense have been kind of blindsided by the popular use, because the sort of the traditional understanding of the term equity that you just described actually is in complete sort of it contradicts the popular notion. So it's one of these things where you say, I believe in equity, and I'm thinking what you just described. That people get what they deserve,
right?
Whereas
and the reason why what they're calling equity, they used to simply use the word equality, an equal distribution of the goods of society. They've chosen to use equity because people have recognized a long time ago that equality doesn't really work. And so most discussions of distributive justice have focused around the idea of equity as historically understood. So what they're doing is they're co-opting the language, redefining it, and using it in such a way that it looks like the older writers who talked about equity as the proper approach to distributive justice are saying the same thing they are, when they're not. They've changed the definition of the word, I think, deliberately in order to obfuscate the situation.
Yeah, and I think the statement you just made about equality not working, well, it also sort of raises the question, what do we mean by working? So, for example, if we talk about, say, a game of basketball, there are a lot of things that play into why one team beats another team. But if we have sort of as sort of a starting point with regard to outcomes that neither team should win, but instead it should just be this. You remember that game called the Ungame? I don't know. It was like popular in the 70s. It was basically this sort of, I guess, hippie kind of idealistic game, or a game that was based on this ideal that no one should lose. And it was the dullest game you could possibly imagine, because it just, you're like, okay, nobody loses. All right, let's go do something else.
So as another example, there's a story that goes around, it's probably apocryphal, in which a professor said that he was going to average all of the test scores and give everybody the same grade. And, at first, there were some people who did the work and it sort of pulled the average up. But by averaging the grades, their work was worth less because they got a lower grade. So they stopped working and the entire class failed.
Or you could say they all got an A, but no one actually scored any points because no one got anything right. But everything. But I get what you're saying. But you can have a race to the bottom when you remove the incentives.
Right, and that's why equality doesn't work as a form of distributive justice. Right. Now, the reason why I brought this up is their idea was, and this goes back to the sexual revolution. This is going back to the 70s. Arguably the 60s, but definitely in the 70s. The argument is that women should be able to participate in sexual activities on the same terms as men.
Right.
And now, since men don't really necessarily have any long-term consequences themselves for engaging in sexual activity, women shouldn't either. But because of biological realities, there's a possibility of pregnancy. And therefore, abortion is necessary as a form of equity so that women can be as sexually active as men without consequence.
Yeah, with as few consequences as men experience. Yeah. But that kind of gets me to my point that what we end up with is a kind of Procrustean bed. Mm-hmm. Where something is cut away. And in this case, a human being is cut away. So we have a developing baby who is destroyed in order to sustain this ideal of justice. And it works in different ways in different areas. If we say that, well, you remember Harrison Bergeron, the short story, and in that short story, who was it? Kurt Vonnegut. So Vonnegut, in that short, it's a great story, and it's available online. It's very short, but it's very potent. He envisions a future in which equality is what we've just described. In other words, equal outcomes. Nobody has an advantage over anyone else, which necessarily creates a kind of handicapping situation. So you had the handicapper general, Diana Moon Glampers. You know that she's a lesbian. But anyway, but in the story, Harrison Bergeron is the most talented, able man in the history of the world. He's a genius. He's physically awesome, and he's public enemy number one. So he has to be handicapped in a wide range of ways in order to prevent him from having any advantage over anyone else. So he has earphones that scatter his thoughts because it would be unfair for him to be able to think things that other people can't think. He has to have weights on his body to slow him down because it would be unfair for him to be stronger or faster than anybody else. And so he's just like this comic sort of figure. He's so good looking they make him wear a clown nose. Just all these different things, and he breaks free. He gets out of prison and rips all of these handicaps off of himself and declares himself emperor of the world. And then Diana Moon Glampers kills him with a shotgun. But anyway, on national television, in front of his parents who are watching the show. But anyway, I've given it all away. But this is the absurdity that we must be reduced to if we take this really to heart. So my proposal, I know it's radical, my proposal is that we, in some sense, alter our definition of justice to be more sort of in accord with the reality that we live in. And in one respect, that reality has to do with the differences between men and women, which necessarily means that there are going to be certain things that apply to men and certain things that apply to women because we are different. Anyway, I've been canceled all across America right now.
Well, yeah, of course, a good chunk of America doesn't any longer know what it means to be a man or a woman. So, right. I mean, what you said may or may not be offensive because we don't know what those things mean. So, to take offense at anything said about it itself assumes already a binary.
Right, that's right.
And so anyway, but one of the things I think before jumping into some of the other themes you just mentioned there is when you talk about the severing that goes on with of course the human life and the mother, there are several other aspects of reality that are getting severed at the same time. One, of course, we already noted, I think, from Glenn's point, is once the model becomes autonomous, the autonomous male, if you will, then you've created now the autonomous female. You have now a fracture in humanity between male and female, of course, and then you have a unrealistic definition of what it means to be human, autonomous. So now you have a fracture, and then you have a consequence is now the child being severed, culture of death. But then you have all the social ramifications that go with that. So the reality of cutting against a created moral order, and that is where you start to have the social ramifications of broken families, of children that do end up getting born, but the mother wants to still be autonomous, and the father wants nothing to do with it. The state comes in to basically fill that gap. And so justice now we talk about the issue of equity. What you have now, a war against kind of the classic family is really a war, to this new kind of equity. Because if they can, and they're working very hard, especially the school systems, to redefine. Now they want to eliminate the term mother and father. They're going after this because if they can, the advantages you have of having a classic natural family compared to the disadvantages of not having that or having a broken situation, those gaps cannot be made up for unless you bring the natural family, the classic family, down. And it's similar. There's this talk of white privilege and all this stuff. Yeah, there are advantages from the history and all of that. But on the other hand, what they want to do, rather than create conditions for others to advance, is they want to bring one group down to lift another group up. And of course, I'm using group the way they do, not the way reality is structured. And so I think what we have going on with that issue of abortion is already tied to a whole web of things that have been fighting the moral and created order, trying to use a kind of false definition of autonomous human being at the center of it, and then unable to deal with it other than in more radically oppressive ways to achieve some sense of justice.
Yeah, which gets me back to this question, what is justice and how do we understand it? Is it something that exists as an abstraction and an ideal that is superimposed on reality? Or is it in some sense something that necessarily has to be in harmony with reality? Now, just the very fact that I used the word reality challenges a number of the assumptions of, sort of the modern outlook that there is something that exists outside our heads, that things are not merely socially constructed. Dimorphism, for example. So binaries, so this war on binaries. Well, this binary that we're talking about with regard to male and female just simply is the case, not just for the human species, but for all mammals. And so it's just simply the case. And you might present this as sort of an offense that needs to be redressed because it doesn't accord with your notion of justice. But the problem is not reality, it's your notion of justice. Your notion of justice needs to be informed by the realities that we're given. But this brings us back to kind of the fundamental problem of givenness. So when I use the term given, that implies there's a giver, that there is some wisdom and benevolence that informs the gift and in the giving, that this isn't just a malevolent sort of act. Now, it doesn't mean that we necessarily see the good off the bat. Maybe we long for something different and we just are given something we didn't ask for. That's often the case in life, isn't it? I mean, when I was a kid, at Christmas, I imagine I'm not all that different than anyone else, but I would make a long list of things that I wanted for Christmas. And often coming to thousands of dollars with the expense. I would just go through the catalog from Sears, whatever, and anything that struck my eye, I'd put a little mark on the page, and I'd add it up and I'd hand it to my parents and say, "Here you go." And then I would get socks. I never put socks on my list, but they were there. They were given. And my parents loved me and gave me my socks. And they expected me to be grateful. But I honestly, I wasn't. I wasn't grateful for socks. I was looking for the G.I. Joe headquarters or something like that. And now every once in a while, my parents would actually give me something I wanted. But very often, that wasn't the case. And that's the way things are in the world that we live in. We have a God that has given us a number of things that we need to learn to be grateful for. So the fact that women have not just simply the biological equipment to bear children, but actually have a kind of moral obligation to do so. And I'm going to get to that in a minute. And men, likewise, have the ability to procreate and take responsibility for their children when those children are conceived and born, there's a moral component. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that we've talked about before, although it's been a while, I think. Teleology. When we talk about things that are given, we usually think about them as things that are past, that we have received these things. But one of the givens about our nature is teleology. That is to say that there are many things about us that have a natural end, a natural purpose. And when it comes to our sexuality, well, what is the biological term for the system that's involved in that? It's the reproductive system.
Right.
That tells us right away that the natural end of sex, the proper teleology for it, is reproduction. And when we lose sight of that, when we lose sight of this as one of the givens, one of the natural ends, then it's not surprising when we're denying reality, biology, all of those kinds of things at that level. It's not surprising that we get screwed up in terms of thinking about justice, equality, and those sorts of things as well in this arena.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom. I can see you're chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wanted to do a little commentary on what Glenn was saying, because I think a related point is we also live in a very confusing moment in many ways. But one is we have what Lewis would often talk about is kind of the two different views of humanity that have been produced, if you will, in the Western world as it rejected the Christian vision, or even the classic visions, philosophical. One is that we're basically angels, right? That we transcend the body. In the true self is the angelic self, the spiritual, the feeling, depending on however you do it. And then the other side is the deterministic, that we're nothing but brutes, just maybe a higher caliber. So we're determined by our embodied endowment. And rather than the psychosomatic unity, which is to be in harmony, that's the classic Christian vision, we have a war going on. We have a war on one side for those who think we're basically angels trapped in a body that we need to somehow transcend or bring the body in conformity to our Gnostic self, our ghost in the machine. So technology becomes a vehicle through which we can bring the body, which is raw material, for this view into harmony with it. And so you see this with maybe the trans agenda of altering the body, taking certain hormones, changing it. But then you have the flip side that you could say was used more for maybe classic arguments for homosexuality, which was, well, in my current embodied state, this is my natural inclination. And so you have, even in the big kind of colorful rainbow, oppositional anthropologies going on, which are going to end up becoming a war at some point. But I think these same issues have been paralleled where the male-female, and the ripping it from the procreative. And I think Protestants didn't help by kind of jettisoning the procreative as a choice, rather than a commission, that there is freedom in Christ, for example, for certain peculiar vocations and calling, but those are rare and they're not the norm.
Right.
Yeah, if they are the norm, then we go the way of the Shakers, and we're all dead in a generation.
Yeah.
So
another thing that's worth noting here is, how do you define healthcare? Now, I know we're moving a little bit off of the justice issue, but I think it's connected here. How do you define healthcare? I would argue that a good basic definition of healthcare is doing what is necessary to allow the body to perform its natural functions properly. Under those circumstances, if you take that definition, which I think is a reasonable one, neither abortion nor gender-affirming surgery or treatments are healthcare, because what they're designed to do is to introduce dysfunction into the body so that it cannot fulfill its natural purposes.
Yeah, and I think that, underneath our convictions concerning health and nature, we have an understanding that there is a creator who, in his wisdom, has ordered things in the ways that we've traditionally recognized as natural. I want to go back, though, to a statement I made a minute ago concerning the moral obligation to bear children, because I know that some people probably choked on their coffee when I said that. So I'd like to sort of flesh it out a little bit. So as human beings, we owe our existence to our ancestors. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. And in a sense, we carry forward, the actual inheritance that we've received biologically from them, and we carry that forward. That's one dimension of this discussion that I think is worth just keeping in mind, kind of filing on the shelf. But the other dimension is the fact that we are also social creatures in the moment. So none of us are capable of sustaining a really rewarding and enriched life just on our own. I mean, even if we go out into the wilderness and we cut down some trees and create a cabin and all that kind of stuff. What do we do? What do we bring with us into the wilderness? If not the tools, the knowledge that allows us to do those things. In other words, we're not creating things from scratch through just experimentation. We bring with us a treasure trove of knowledge that we've received from interacting with the people around us. Furthermore, an economy is something in which you've got many people doing their part to help enrich the whole. Now, I know that we don't engage in our economic activities with that explicitly in mind on a day-to-day basis. We're thinking mainly about our own welfare, but it's because we are working together that we enrich each other. Related to this, children are absolutely fundamental to a healthy social order and economy. You remove them, and the entire thing collapses. And it's not just something that you experience as an individual, say, if you didn't have kids and they're not there to take care of you. If there is a sort of a birth dearth on the culture at large, the culture at large will suffer. And we are in the early stages of experiencing the breakdown of that sort of pay it forward when you have a kid. You are contributing to the larger order of things. Now, of course, you can raise children poorly. You can harm them in ways that make the result is unfortunate. But it's just simply a fact that this is the way things work, which means that bearing children is not simply a private decision. The choice to or not to bear children has a larger social sort of set of consequences that follow. And what I'm doing here is I'm helping us to see, or attempting to help our listeners see that our understanding of justice doesn't accord with that physical reality either. It's been reduced to sort of maximizing my personal, choices and sort of actual, sort of being free to realize my own, I guess, dreams or whatever. It's not dealing with the reality that we find ourselves in. We are all enjoying the benefits or the consequences of decisions that other people make every day. We are simply social creatures. So we're biologically connected to the sort of the past with, the fact that we are who we are and where we are today because of other people. But we're also here today doing what we're doing in the moment with the people that we share the world with. And justice has to keep all these things in mind, or it's just simply not just. It's just insane, if you get my drift. Anyway,
Yeah, as an example, back in the 1970s, um, late 70s, maybe into the 80s, it looked like Japan was going to take over the world economically.
I remember that. Do you remember But you remember Back to the Future, where what was the character that was in Back to the Future? The kid that goes, back in time, or he goes forward in time,
Yeah.
and he's like an employee of some Japanese executive, and to look back on that now, it's just laughable.
Yeah. And well, theoretically, at one point, Tokyo was more valuable real estate wise than I think it was the entire United States.
That's right.
Or a significant percentage of it. But
right.
so what happened? Now, the Japanese, it's still a powerhouse economy, but nobody's thinking the Japanese are going to take over the world economically. We're looking more at China or whatever. Although China's got its own issues, but that's a different matter. Japan has been below replacement rate for so long now that they're going to run out of Japanese.
Yeah,
I mean, just to put it, bluntly, no economy ever grew with a shrinking population.
Yeah, and that, I think, is a reality that many progressives just never consider or factor into their understandings, not just of justice, but in terms of human good. And I came across a couple of data points related to Japan that I think are just shocking. One is that Japan loses about 500,000 people a year. So it's in pretty precipitous decline. It's been in a kind of no growth mode since the early 90s. It's just been kind of treading water. Furthermore, I just read this past week that 30,000 Japanese die alone in their apartments, undiscovered. And the only reason that people know that there's a dead body in the apartment is the smell. 30,000 people are discovered every year just by the smell. That's a stunning.
And there's actually a business now in Japan that exists to clean out those apartments.
That's right. Now, lest we think that we can look down our noses at the Japanese, they're just ahead of the curve on this. Yeah. We're all on this same trajectory. Every part of the world. The only part of the world that I believe this is not the case is sub-Saharan Africa. But everywhere else in the world, even Mexico is not at replacement level anymore. Their population is in decline. So the people who propose solving our problems in the United States with immigration are just kicking the can down the road. People come to the United States, they work hard, and in one generation, they're as bad as we are. In fact, their fertility rate goes as low, if not lower, than the rest of the American population.
Yeah. And you're seeing this in even high population Latin American countries. I mean, families that just a generation ago had huge amounts of children. Now their children are not having. A lot of them are not having any children. Not just right. A couple or one, but none. And they're celebrating all this. And I don't think they have a clue what's around the corner, and for them in their own life, but also what's coming within a generation or two.
Yeah, my conviction, and one of the reasons why I decided on this subject for the show today, is that we are going to recover the hard way a more, I think, realistic understanding of justice, particularly as it relates to some of these matters that we're talking about right now. So, in an odd way, the recent decision overturning Roe may 20, 30 years down the road be looked back upon as like one of the most enlightened things that people could have done at the point in our history that anyone could have done. It was maybe it's even an inflection point. If we see, so right now, the second largest generation in America's history, the millennials, are at the childbearing stage of life. The baby boomers, we've passed that. We're all retiring and taking, our knowledge and our skills with us into retirement. Maybe they won't let us retire because of the need to keep the machinery running. But nevertheless, that's the situation we find ourselves in. If the millennials don't, and by the way, the millennials in the United States are an anomaly in the world. So the baby boom generation was not nearly as fruitful phenomenon in other parts of the world. So baby boomers in, say, Europe, just didn't have kids like baby boomers in the States did. Baby boomers in the States didn't have as many kids as their parents did, but they had more kids than, say, people in, Germany or other places in Europe or Asia, particularly Asia. I mean, I think that the fertility rate in South Korea is under 1. I think it's at 0.8. So what happens with this is there's kind of a cascading effect. Each generation moving forward. So unless there's a sudden surge of fertility, unless, say, for example, the millennials, averaged 3 children per woman, the situation will continue to decline. So even though we've got a fairly large, relative to the rest of the world, group of millennials, unless they get, the baby bug and get, productive quick, the thing is just going to continue to sort of slide going forward. And what that means, and this is where I think, so like years ago, when conversations concerning reproductive health or, just having children or the sexual revolution, when these things would come up in, say, the 60s, 70s, I remember people would immediately go to the social costs and would talk about those things. If everybody does that, this is what will follow. That's what I remember people talking in that way. No one does that anymore. No one seems to have any sense of the whole or the implications of the behavior of a particular generation and how that will affect the whole. Everybody's just sort of completely out of touch with anything outside their own heads. It's just amazing.
Yeah, the only time you see it is a very abstract relationship to, creation or nature.
Right.
The kind of, for some reason they want to make sure the planet is good for generations to come, but they're not replenishing it with generations to come. And so in many ways there you see this oddity, this really, there is this strangeness to a lot of the kind of hyper green agenda, in the sense that it has this deep care for creation, but it sees the human as kind of the culprit. So they have a kind of functioning doctrine of the fall and depravity of humanity. They just don't have anything redemptive, or they don't see any imago Dei in humanity. And so you don't see the same people talking about how significant it is for the planet to actually be reproducing. You see them all trying to get rid of humanity, lower it, population control.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Have you ever noticed that people who say meat is murder never want to arrest lions?
Yeah, that's right. Right.
I mean, that by itself demonstrates that they understand that human beings are different from animals. Mm-hmm. We have a degree of moral culpability, moral responsibility, whatever you want to call it, that other animals don't have. And they will say that that's not true. But if it isn't, I mean, lions don't care if they're eating endangered species.
That's right. I've noticed that.
I mean, I think that even there, they may reject the idea of the imago Dei, but they sneak it in the back door because they argue we are, in fact, responsible. Cool. Now, because we are responsible, though, that's why we've got to cull the herd. We need fewer of us here because we are squandering the planet's resources. Every one of us uses way more than we should, and therefore we need to lower the population so as not to render the earth uninhabitable. That's their understanding.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I know otherwise intelligent people who are still thinking we're living in Paul Ehrlich's population bomb.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think that's right. I think that there's a kind of a hangover from the Club of Rome in the early 70s and all that kind of disaster film stuff from Soylent Green that really has captured the imagination and just won't let go. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you say sometimes with some of these folks. Now, this brings up the relationship between our notions and convictions concerning justice and abstraction and sanity and all that kind of stuff. There's that great line that's been attributed to I don't know how many different people, but whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad. And it's a great line because what it implies is that the destruction is self-inflicted. So what we're dealing with right now in our society is not so much a meteor falling from the sky or sulfur raining down on Gomorrah or something like that. What we're dealing with is just simply the outworkings of our convictions, and we're going to experience sort of the fruit of those convictions. The idea of you reap what you sow. We've sown a certain seed, and now we're reaping a certain crop. Is there any hope for us? Can we come to our senses? If history is our guide, there will be people who go down to the bitter end denying reality and just will die. And it's almost as though, that a generation has to pass. And we saw this, in the Exodus, generation just has to pass in order for another generation to emerge that is able to learn the lesson that was on display with the previous generation. Will the younger people be able to disengage from the stupidity of their elders? That's what I'm wondering about. And maybe you have some thoughts on that. My hopes, at least at the moment, are not high.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another example, by the way, that most people ignore, Jeremiah's letter to the exiles in Babylon. I know the plans that I have for you, that thing that you find on coffee mugs and plaques in Christian Report. If you read it in context, what he's saying is, settle down, you're going to be there a while. It's going to be 70 years before you return. To translate that into real life, you're going to die in exile.
Yep.
The plans I have to give you a hope in the future are for your kids and grandkids.
Yeah.
You're going to die in exile.
Yeah, Jeremiah 29 may be the most misused passage of Scripture in the Christian faith. It's misused in this sort of pietistic, nationalistic way that you just described, because sometimes people will use it as sort of a call to repentance and so forth. But the other thing that is the progressive, sort of like cool table, gospel coalition, sort of city-centered outlook, missional folks misuse it as well. They'll use that, pray for the city that you find yourself in, because in its welfare you'll find your own. But they never sort of like own up to the fact that the people who were in that city didn't want to be there. In other words, it wasn't like this was a mission that they went on to save Babylon.
Yeah, and think about Babylon in Scripture. It's the only place that Israel has any interactions with that God never says he's going to save. Yeah.
That's fun. It's fun to think about. In fact, it becomes the sort of the emblem of everything that's wrong, and going forward, particularly as we look in Revelation and so forth. But it's fascinating to me, like when people say, "Oh, we should be dedicated to the city." Remember Jeremiah 29. Yeah. I'm like, well, are you implying that New York is Babylon and that we've been like sent there as a punishment? That we're in exile in Babylon, and that's the reason why we ought to pray for the city? Or are you saying that something different? Well, you're saying something different. They're taking everything out of context. These are the people who are supposed to be all about context and nuance and deep thinking. And just this use is just a as horrific as any misuse of scripture that I can think of.
Yeah. But the point of bringing it up is the generation has to die.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So Gospel Coalition people, are you telling us a generation must die in the city as punishment for their wickedness?
Well, or in this case, the generation that does stupid things and that commits themselves to doing stupid things might have to die off before the next generation will realize the mistakes of their elders and move on.
Yeah, and I think that's the case, and it's quite discouraging for those of us who are part of the generation that did all the stupid stuff. We are part of that generation that's under God's judgment.
Yeah, and we see now also I think the attraction to totalitarian impulse of this younger crowd, all in the name as though it's these kind of elite agendas, if you will, are somehow a new Moses that's going to liberate. And you cannot be a prophet loud enough to let them know really what is sorrowfully in store for them if they continue down that path.
Well, it's sort of like they're watching their parents under God's wrath, and they've decided to double down on dumb instead of repenting. They've said, "No, our parents didn't take this far enough. We need to take it even farther." Yeah.
They're free from the Father rather than
right. Right. So I want to get back, I guess, just to this idea of getting our notion of justice or understanding of justice in harmony with certain realities that we find ourselves given. So it would mean necessarily then that there really are double standards that are just, if you get my drift. The term double standard is something that folks just dismiss as, by definition, unjust. But if there are real differences between men and women, then there ought to be standards that apply to men as men and women as women. And then, what would that imply? Well, one of those standards would be with relationship to the sin of abortion, a set of rules that apply to women because they bear children. Men don't bear children. Men sire children, and therefore there should be another set of rules that apply to men who sire children. So it's not as though one side has a set of rules and the other side doesn't. Historically, what we've done is we've required men to care for the children, provide for the children that they helped bring into the world, right? So abortion was a kind of Procrustean bed. Just so the bed of Procrustes, just so folks know if they're not familiar with the story. Everybody's supposed to fit on the bed of Procrustes, and if you're too long, too bad for you, your legs get chopped off or whatever. Everyone must fit on the bed of Procrustes. So the Procrustean bed is a standard that everybody has to conform to that is out of touch with physical realities. So that's what we've been attempting to do. And who has paid the price? Well, obviously, children who have been killed in the womb have paid the price. But I also think that there have been other costs. We wouldn't have the demographic winter that we're entering into if there had not been a very proactive approach to disposing of children like we saw for the last, almost 50 years. The other thing is that I think that women have paid a price physically. There are certain physical consequences that follow abortion. And we're just beginning to fully appreciate how those implications affect health. And then there's just the social cost, ancillary
and
costs.
Psychological for women.
Yep, the psychological costs. And then for men, this sort of get out of jail free card that you can use so that you don't actually take responsibility for your behavior. You can just say, okay, well, there is no cost to me so long as this girl does what I want her to do, which is have an abortion. So there are other costs that we're paying.
And I think you also see the way in which that permeates itself in certain other types of sin. For example, the way in which men often cut off from responsibility and held not to a higher calling start to see sexuality as gratification, exploitative, lust, looks at the body that way. And then you have the flip side, the female who now loathes their looks, their body, their embodiedness. You see young girls shriek at the idea that they could have a baby, and so you've created this kind of disgust with the natural gifts that we have as the kind of creatures we are, made good. And then you see the children that are allowed to survive have no way to navigate. They don't have clear cut. Again, everything's been made so fluid, and they have to pick. There's no worse burden than having to bear this unpremised choice of having to basically self-define. The fact that we've been defined, the fact that we've been named are two of the gifts we have as creatures. And when we've taken this away, we wonder why the children are on all of these medications and depressed and only have these grand visions, even if they're hated by the rest of the populace, to do something harmful to themselves or others to be recognized. And I think this all goes back to that same not holding the right kind of responsibilities to the kind of creatures we are, and the byproducts, the consequences of us not carrying through on that.
Yeah, and I would add one other cost that is all too frequently ignored, and that's that abortion has also historically been a favorite tool of eugenicists.
Yes.
Yeah.
So right now, more Black babies are aborted than born in New York. Yeah. Most Planned Parenthood clinics are in poor areas, and they say, well, that's because the poor need this, except they're in poor Black areas, not poor white areas.
Right.
Margaret Sanger was a known eugenicist. And, this is worth another show later, but another cost that we don't talk about often enough, if we're really interested in racial justice, we should be fighting tooth and nail against abortion because it is being used to keep the Black population down, because historically the eugenicists said they're undesirables. We don't want them.
Yeah, I think George Grant has a book that just came out talking about Margaret Sanger. I think it was Killer Angel is the title of it. I think you can get it over at Canon Press. Yeah, and then of course there are other ways in which just these differences should. So if our understanding is informed, if our understanding of justice is informed by the physical realities, these givens, then it'll be reflected in our laws, and it'll be our laws will be sort of intended to reinforce the goods that are in accord with these realities that inform justice, and this would create a whole different sort of, I guess, jurisprudence, kind of an approach to law, and even it would affect everything. And so my hope is that an ability to recover, or an interest in recovering a notion of justice, or an understanding of justice that's informed by reality, physical reality, would have a host of positive effects, that could play themselves out for a period of time. Anyway, that's all I had to say about the subject. But is there anything you guys want to add before we wrap up the show today?
Yeah, I would just, your comment about double standards didn't sit well with me. I think the standard is you take responsibility for your actions and you take appropriate action with regard to the consequences of your actions. For men, that means standing up and being fathers. For women, it means not aborting your kids, having them. I would say that the principle that's there, the standard is constant for both of them, but it applies in different ways to the different sexes. That would be, I would be more comfortable thinking about it that way.
So like two standards. but no, I know what you're getting at. I'm having a little fun with you. Anyway, anything else you want to say, Tom?
No, I think anything I would say would be up for another whole show. So I think I'll just save it and do another show on it.
All right. Well, anyway, thank you for listening to the Theology Pugcast. We appreciate the fact that you've gotten to this point. You're actually listening to my voice right now at the very end of the show. And we want to just thank those who are listening, who give on a regular basis to the show. There are a range of ways to do that. We have people who give to us through the Fight, Laugh, Feast network, and that's a great way to do it. We have folks who give to us through other platforms, and we're glad for that too. There's this new Patreon page. I encourage you to just visit it because it'll make you laugh for no other reason. There are levels at which a person could support the show on a month-to-month basis. And my favorite is Rousseau's Assassin. If you want to see what Rousseau's Assassin looks like, you need to go to the Theology Pugcast Patreon page. And anyway, with those things in mind, I do want to say one last thing. We've got an event coming up in September that my church is sponsoring. It's a conference, and the conference is entitled Negative World, or Welcome to Negative World. And we've got a great host of speakers. Aaron Wren will be with us at the church, and James Wood will be there, the former editor from First Things Magazine, and then Joe Rigney, the president of Bethlehem Seminary and College in Minneapolis, will also be one of the speakers. And it's going to be on the 9th and 10th of September. And we'll put a link to that as well in the show notes. We'd love to have you with us if you want to spend a few days in the Pacific Northwest with us. We'd love to have you. Anyway, that's it for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.